Hi there, everyone. How are you? So, what we're going to do is that today's day 30, and my goal is to talk to you about human psychology. Specifically, we've had this discussion before of just nature versus nurture. Now, if we were in class, what I always like to do on this day is I like to have some type of discussion with you of we usually spend about I'd say one full class period gathering information, past experiences, interviewing, doing anything that we can to try and gather some data in order to figure out the question of is crime nature or is crime nurture? And this is kind of our culmination of our forensic psychology unit. Now, I've had some struggles going and doing it on, like PowerPoint here. If you can see, it's 1:52 a.m. on Monday. Because specifically I'm going and I'm trying to decide how can I appropriately and accurately represent this debate to you. So here's what I did, and this is going to be kind of an odd one, but our day, specifically what you're going to be doing, is that I'm going to try and give you the key points of the debate. What I've seen in the past, what my students bring up and say are key points of the nature and key points of nurture. And instead of you going out and getting the data, here's kind of what I did. I have about 8 to 10 probably peer reviewed full articles on Canvas. Anything that I show you today is backed up. It's science. And I think that it's important for you to understand or to be interested in looking and reading, or at least skimming, peer review articles. So here's kind of what I want to do is that I'm going to start out with just our debate as I normally would preface it. And I am going to go through each specific, just again, aspect of that debate, and I am going to give you an article. And I am going to try to cut out key points. They might be figures, they might be snippets of that article that I think are important to the debate. Now, assigned today, all I want you to do is that if some one of these articles interests you, go and skim the article. Go and read. Go and learn for the sake of learning as opposed to having a discussion board post or anything of the sort. Then next time you don't have anything of homework wise, you're all done for the semester. This is our final week, and we're going to call it quits after this, unfortunately. So let's get into our debate first. And what I always like to do is on this day, I like to start with a quote, much like I've done countless other days before this. But my quote is a little bit odd one. My quote is a quote from Ted Bundy, and it says, "If you want to stop people from becoming like me, don't burn Catcher in the Rye, burn Hustler." I like to start with this quote because you go and you start thinking, obviously a psychodepraved mind of some sort. What exactly has caused for Ted Bundy, the name that everyone across the board has heard, to turn into Ted Bundy? Now, I've asked you all this question before, and I've asked you all to raise your hand and say, okay, do you believe that it is 51% nature or 51% nurture? And I think today that it is important for me not to give you my opinion. And what I mean by that is that I'm going to try to keep my opinion out of it entirely and talk only in science and talk only in facts. So let's start out. Our first article is "Why do so many young American men commit crimes and why or what might we do about this or about it?" So I'm going to ask you, if this is our first article, what are some questions that arise because of this article? What exactly do you think about whenever you see this article? Now, I always have two questions whenever I see this. I go and I say, why do you say they're young? And why do you say they're male? That's it. Again, whenever we do our just, forensic profiling, you always go and you give me ages 20 to 30, white men. Why? Why is it statistically, you know, applicable or average for white American men to be the offenders, especially in violent crime. So let's go and let's just talk a little bit about these questions. First off, something that I want to attack is that you have to know just brain function in just general. Brain function, and specifically the type of crime, is always convinced and always contained within the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that really controls your inhibitions, your empathy, your decision making. It's trying to go and to allow for you to understand what is right, what is wrong, and what decisions should you use to make an informed, call. That's the idea. Now, our first article is Adolescent Engagement in Dangerous Behaviors is Associated with an Increased White Matter Maturity on Frontal Cortex. Specifically, I have some snippets here, and I want to just read these snippets together. One theory suggests that risk-taking in adolescence results from a mismatch in maturity between emotional systems and cognitive control systems of the brain. According to this dual systems theory, development of hedonic drive systems, e.g. sensation or seeking, occurs early in adolescence, which is then followed in development by cognitive control systems. Cross-sectional studies of cognitive and emotional function suggest that sensation seeking follows a curvilinear trajectory, also peaking in mid-adolescence, while impulse control develops linearly into adulthood. Now, that probably sounds like a big whole ton of mumble jumble. But what I want to do is I want to break it down for you and make it a little bit more well known. This is the graph from the same exact study. This is just questionable or risk-seeking behavior and a graph between the ages of 12 to 18, and it shows the progression. Now, with this graph, you can go and you can see, obviously, you've known because you're involved in this scenario. Teenagers are by far some of the stupidest, and I don't mean like mentally IQ wise, but decision making stupidest people that you will hear of ever. And why? Why in the world? I mean, I've told you time after time after time, my job for you is to inform. I want you to make smart decisions, but the problem is you literally are not able to make smart decisions yet. Your prefrontal cortex is developing, and what ends up happening is that these are risk factors. And in this study, if you actually go and you read it, it's things like alcohol, drug use, increased sex, like just risk factors that teenagers use and do on a regular basis. Now, this postulates that the risk factors increase with age, that as you go from 14 to 18, you take more risks as an 18-year-old and theoretically as a 19-year-old than you would as a 14-year-old. So now let's talk about age. This is antisocial trajectories based off of male and female patterns. And specifically, what I want you to notice is that with this, it all talks about age. So these are how many males versus females would fight, destroy, lie, steal, if they're truant, things of that nature. Now, there's two specific trends that we can go and we can look at here. The first one always is going to be, what is the trend of age? That's going to be our first one. So let's just take, what do we think is the most aggressive? Let's do destroy, because that seems weird. Destroy, if they are age 7, then 27.4% of the males have said that they are going to go and they are, or have destroyed. And as they progress, it goes from 27, 24, 20, 23, 25 at age 15. There's this spike, age 18, 13, 18, 9 at 26, 6.9% at 32. So what's the trend of age? Or if we look at, let's say, just fight in general, 59, 55, 44, 62, 43, 52, 37, 29, 11. Do you notice how there's kind of this pattern in this study, where if we go and we actually just talk about the age here on our x-axis and just the specific behavior of whatever it is, so behavior, that as they age, it goes and with almost every single one, look at this, lie, it first starts kind of high and it drops until you hit a certain point right around, I'd say, 13. And then after 13, if you notice the differences, besides bully, rob, it almost acts as if behavior goes up and then back down. There's almost this peak in adolescence talking specifically about how your behavior, because your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, there's this spike. So then I ask you, why then aren't teenagers the ones committing all the crimes? It's 20s to 30s is statistically the average, so why in the world? Now, something else that we can take a look here is we could go and we could answer our other question. Why are they young? Okay, prefrontal cortex development might have something to do with it. Why are they male? It's your second question. And again, from this, if you see the differences between the males and the females, notice the correlation patterns for each specific one. For it doesn't matter what you have, the male value is always higher than the female value. This study is going, and it's not trying to prove. You have to understand these studies don't prove, they show that there's a difference between the age and the correlation and a male and female pattern. So now we ask ourselves, why male then? And here's what I want to go and want to talk about is that the timing of the onset of antisocial behavior is one of the most critical pieces of information in understanding maladaptive behaviors, substance use, alcoholism, delinquency, and criminal justice system involvement. Is talking specifically about how the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until the mid 20s, of how antisocial behaviors are more prevalent in males than they are females, of how mental illness then is more prevalent in males than it is in females. So then we ask ourselves, is it mental illness then? Because mental illness has both nature and nurture, the same exact thing as what you would expect normally. Is it mental illness then that commits crime? And I went and I found this article of how often and consistently do symptoms directly precede criminal behavior among offenders with mental illness. Of we talk about if they're on a schizophrenia spectrum, then 23% are mostly related directly to symptoms. Or bipolar, 62% is directly related to symptoms. Is mental illness then going to be the offset of crime? Is that going to be what causes or a very, very large underlying factor of crime? If I ask you then, do you believe that mental illness rather than crime itself, if mental illness is a factor of nature versus nurture? I bet you a majority then would say nature. I wholeheartedly agree. There's some of both, but if we talk about nature, mental illness, you go and you think of it is more, you know, intrinsic than it is behaviorally. And I bet you more of you would say nature. So I went on the hunt for nurture for mental illness. And what I found is I found this article, Epigenetic Mechanisms of Schizophrenia. And specifically, I want to look here that there is an inverse relationship between socioeconomic status and incidence of schizophrenia. What that means is that, again, if we make our graph, it's literally socioeconomic status is money. Of if we plot just the prevalence, prevalence is PRE, prevalence as opposed to the dollars, then it's not high dollars is high prevalence. It's literally that as this decreases, prevalence increases. So you would go and you would have a graph that looks more, oh, I should have, oh, I flipped it. But I should have dollars on the X and prevalence on the Y, and you can go and you can figure out, again, the more money you have, then the prevalence of schizophrenia goes down. This is the main idea and what you're trying to determine. Or down here, higher incidence of schizophrenia among migrant and ethnic minority groups living in large cities. This article is arguing, it's going and it's trying to state how this mental illness is predated and it's pushed forward by the systematic just oppression that they feel, that they go ahead and they experience on a day-to-day basis. All of this, I just want you to start thinking exactly or just what do you have, or what do you influence, and what are you influenced by that would create such a question. Now, for every single argument of nurture, there's another one of nature. And here, again, this is normal development of prefrontal cortex from birth to young adulthood, cognitive functions, anatomy, and biochemistry. And what this, researcher did is they went and they literally took a brain scan and they figured out that brains with less gray matter in use who committed homicide relative to their peers who did not. Literally, that you can see a physical change from homicide. Then would that go and tell you then, is that nature or is that nurture? All of these are different questions that I just kind of want you to think about. Is it going to be, again, the age? Is it going to be the gender? Is it specifically going to be just how they act and are perceived? Is it antisocial behavior? Is it mental illness? Is the mental illness itself then more of a factor of nature, or is it more of a factor of nurture? Of if the brain literally has physical changes because of crime, then is that going to be a more, prevalence to commit future crime? All of these are different questions that I want you to think about, and I would have loved to have this discussion with you. I really, really would have. This is always one of my favorite debates to have in my class. So I want you to think right now, just think. If this is your hypothesis, do you believe that crime is more nature, or do you believe that crime is more nurture? Of what factors do you believe influence crime? I've told you from the very, very beginning, forensics is meant to stop crime, literally. We try to do it with evidence, we try to do it with testimony, we try to do it every single time. That is the goal of forensics, is to stop crime. But if we don't attack crime before crime occurs, then what are we doing? So I want you to think first. Just really, really think of it. What exactly do you think influences crime? Do you think it's mental illness? Do you think it's age? Do you think it's gender? What factors affect crime? And then all I want you to do is I want you to skim any of these articles. As I said, every single thing that I have here gives you a specific title of the article, and each article is ranging from 15 to 40 pages. Skim. Find something that interests you. Learn for the sake of learning. And see if your viewpoint cannot be, I won't say changed, but shifted. How about? Let me play devil's advocate through a computer screen, and I would love, absolutely love, to hear your ideas next time. But everyone, once again, thank you. I hope you are all doing great, and I will see you soon.